Okay, students, this is the review for the Federalism chapter of AP Government. I'm going to be doing a little bit different style of filming this time instead of just propping up the iPad. Maybe we can get better audio and a better view of what's on the board. And hopefully I won't kill myself stepping over the desk. But this is the quickie review over the Federalism chapter, Chapter 3, so follow along. There is a lot of stuff. Let me see if I can backing up. There's a whole bunch of stuff for this chapter. Okay, please try and remember all of it. But starting off with the basics of federalism, it's a political system where power is divided between the national and regional levels, which in America, of course, are the states. Each level is different authority, and it tends to be over the same territories and the same people. In federal systems, typically they have a constitution which establishes and sets up all the different powers and the prohibitions of those different governments. So that's federalism in a nutshell. Lots of powers with this chapter: expressed, implied, inherent, concurrent, reserved, prohibited. Please know them all and know the differences. Express powers are also known as delegated powers, enumerated powers. Those are the powers given directly to the federal government. Those are national powers, and those are established by Articles 1 through 5 of the Constitution. Below those express powers, you have the implied powers. Those are not specifically written in the Constitution, but they can be reasonably inferred. The clause that establishes those implied powers is also known as the necessary and proper clause. That gives the Congress and the federal government the authority to make all laws necessary and proper to carry out their expressed powers. That necessary and proper clause is also known as the elastic clause. You have your inherent powers, which are those powers given to the national government simply because it is the national government. It is a sovereign territory, a sovereign government, and so it has powers specifically because of that status. Concurrent powers, those shared by the national government and shared by the states. They mix and match over numerous powers. You have reserved powers. Those are the powers just for the states. And that is more specifically addressed by the 10th Amendment. The powers basically not given to the national government nor explicitly denied to the states are supposed to be held by the states. Those are reserved. Prohibited powers, those are the powers denied both, well, they can be either denied to the national government, denied to the state government, or they can be denied to both. And we'll get more into detail on those powers in later chapters. But for now, just know that they exist. A better, more detailed list of those national powers and state powers and both powers is right here. First up, we have the national list. This is all of them, including expressed, implied, and inherent powers. So these are the ones that are either put into the Constitution or can be implied from those express powers. They have the power to regulate commerce, both foreign and interstate. The national government can coin and print money. They can establish courts. They can create an army and a navy to protect the country. They can declare war on foreign countries. They can establish and hold on to foreign relations. Like we already mentioned, the necessary and proper clause, they can establish all laws necessary and proper to carry out their other laws. They can acquire new lands and admit new states into the Union, and they are supposed to be in charge of immigration. The national government also shares, they share powers with the states, and those are the concurrent powers. Both national and state have the power to levy taxes, which means they can tax you. They can borrow money. They can spend on the welfare of their citizens. They can establish lower courts than the Supreme Court. They can enact laws and enforce laws, and they can both levels, national and state, can charter banks. Then there are state powers. Too close again. They are reserved powers. The states have the right to regulate intrastate commerce. Notice there's a difference between intrastate and interstate. Intrastate is within the states. They're in charge of their own commerce. They also have the right to establish their own local governments. They can set up school systems. They are in charge of administering elections. They are also in charge of the health, the welfare, the morals of their individual citizens. They can regulate corporations within their states, and they can establish licensing requirements for all the various professions within their state. What is that? We're not quite there yet. Let's look at interstate relations, though. Those are all established by Article 4 of the Constitution. That defines state relationships, especially some very important clauses. The full faith and credit clause it states basically that states have to give full faith and credit to the documentation of other states, wills, marriage licenses, birth certificates, all sorts of stuff has to be. If you go from one state to another, states have to recognize it. Privileges and immunities. States basically cannot unreasonably discriminate from citizens of other states coming into their states. with the exception of a few areas like voting rights and oh, my brain just died of me. Voting rights and like college tuition. Extradition, states will traditionally, if they have a criminal that flees into their state, they will send him back. And if they have problems that crisscross borders and go over state lines, they can form interstate compacts with permission from Congress to deal with those issues. With federalism, it's not every government in the world uses it. Because it has its own advantages and disadvantages. Advantages, it is good for big countries. Look at the biggest countries in the world, they are all federalist. We are, Russia is, Australia, Brazil, some of the biggest countries typically are federal because it is good for them. It helps to organize them. Federalism also avoids concentrations of power by spreading it out amongst multiple levels, national, state, local. It was great, particularly for us, because it accommodated existing states. There were states that existed before the foundation of our national government, and it helped to accommodate them and bring them into the federal government. The states tend to also serve as training grounds for national leaders. It's very often you'll see in politics that governors, local senators will, at the state level, will go on to to do work for the national government and be quite good at their jobs. It also keeps government close to the people. Specific disadvantages: constitutions have tended to be fairly inflexible, and it can be very difficult to change the government. When you have many governments, it causes complexity. There are so many different levels of government, it causes bureaucracy and for some people all sorts of issues when they try and get problems solved. You do see a duplication of offices. There tend to be offices at the state level, the national level, the local level, sometimes for the same thing. And invariably there are always conflicts over authority. Remember we talked about how we have national and state powers, those taxes, borrowing money, spending on welfare courts, all those when there are multiple groups that have power over the same thing, there can be conflicts over who gets to do what. One of the other clauses that you need to know is the Supremacy Clause, and that is specifically stated in Article 6 of the Constitution. Basically, it says that the Constitution, all the laws of the Constitution, all the treaties in the Constitution, they are supreme. They are the supreme law of the land. And we saw two court cases in this chapter that upheld the Supremacy Clause. We saw McCulloch v. Maryland, that's in 1819, and Gibbons v. Ogden in 1824. McCulloch versus Maryland is basically laying out the background for the implied powers and the case for national supremacy. Gibbons v. Ogden is more about interstate commerce. It says national governments trump state governments in the area of interstate commerce. The national government always gets to decide interstate issues. We have also this chapter multiple types of federalism. We have a bunch of them. We have dual federalism, we have cooperative federalism, we have new federalism, and fiscal federalism. So pay attention. The first two, pretty easy: dual federalism, cooperative federalism. These are your cake models. Dual federalism is the layer cake form of federalism. It basically, with dual federalism, it's the oldest type. It says that the national and state governments are supreme in their own spheres of influence, their own areas, and they should not be any mixing. They are individual autonomous layers. An example of this type of federalism is saying that states should only be involved in education, the national government shouldn't get involved, or the national government should be the only one dealing with foreign policy. States should not be getting involved in that. Compared to this is cooperative federalism, also known as marble cake federalism. This developed after the New Deal and the Great Depression, and basically it says that national and state government should share policy, they should cooperate on solving issues and problems. A great example of this was the national and state governments working together on the interstate systems that we see in our country. New federalism, this is a very conservative style of federalism, and it's developed by Presidents Nixon, Reagan, and then the first Bush, H.W. Bush. And they are trying to reverse all the stuff that came with cooperative federalism. Specifically, they're giving more power to the states. And we call this devolution. It's power transfer to the subunits. They want to take power from the national government and give it to the state governments. A great example of this was welfare reform, returning all the authority over welfare and control of welfare programs back to the states. And the last but not least, our very modern form of federalism is fiscal federalism. And this is basically the national government using spending policy, taxation policy, and a wide variety of grants to influence the state and local governments to do what they want. And the ways that fiscal policy, what they use fiscal policy for to influence the states and the nation, there's a whole variety of ways, all related to money. You have grants and aid, you have categorical grants, you have block grants, you have revenue sharing, and you have mandates. Grants and aid is money given by the national government for specific projects, usually infrastructure projects like roads and railroads and canals. Compared to categorical grants, very similar. It's money for purposes defined by law. It's for specific projects and it has to be spent on those projects. There are usually more restrictions on categorical grants. Sometimes they require matching funds from the states. Sometimes they are competitive. An example lately is the Race to the Top educational grants by the Obama administration. Those are also called project grants when they are competitive. Sometimes they're based on formulas like Medicare and Medicaid, and those are called formula grants. Compared to categorical grants, you have block grants, which is it's money given for a very broad category, like education or healthcare. And states like them because there are few strings attached to that money. It's basically the national government giving them money and say, hey, you have to spend it in this area. Then you have revenue sharing. The states love this because this is just money that is handed out by the federal government to the states, and it's no strings attached. It's money just for them to use and whatever they feel is necessary. However, the states love revenue sharing. They cannot stand mandates. And mandates are requirements that are imposed on the states by the national government. More often than not, they have to be paid for by the states, and those are called unfunded mandates. And so you can see why states don't like those. They don't like being told what to do by the national government and have no money from the national government to help them deal with those mandates. Classic example of an unfunded mandate was the Americans with Disabilities Act. The national government basically told the state governments, hey, you have to change all public facilities. You have to modify them to accommodate people with disabilities. And there was simply no federal money for that. But that's the chapter. Let me see if I can back up here. Ooh, don't fall. Remember to study your different types of federalism. You should know the advantages and disadvantages of federalism. Remember your clauses. I underline them in green. You've got the supremacy clause. You've got the full faith and credit and the privileges and immunities clauses under interstate relations. Remember the various powers of the governments, what powers the national government has, what powers the state government has, and what powers are concurrent. Remember what federalism is, of course. You kind of need to know that for the chapter. And remember the different types of powers. But good luck studying tonight, and I'll see you tomorrow.